So Eisenhower, this is going to be very quick because we've already talked a lot about the end of World War II, this transition to an area of prosperity for many, not for all. And so Eisenhower is this in between. He's in between Truman and he is before Kennedy. Eisenhower is going to continue these policies of containment that Truman starts, but then he's also going to start to engage around the world with different types of crises and set a standard for how the United States is going to respond to different incidents throughout the Cold War. He believes in MAD, which stands for mutually assured destruction, this idea that we need to at minimum be matching the arsenal that the Soviet Union has. He also believes in massive retaliation, that the United States needs to have the ability at any moment to massively retaliate against any transgression that the Soviets may have. Truman will not seek re-election in 1952. Remember, he had come into office at the death of FDR, so he could have sought re-election, but he did not. The Democrats nominate someone named Adlai Stevenson. The Republicans nominate Dwight D. Eisenhower, a war hero from World War II. There's not much competition there. Eisenhower believes that the key to victory in the Cold War was military might and a strong economy. He felt that way as he dealt with Khrushchev in the Soviet Union. He believed that key to stopping the spread of communism was massive retaliation. We talked about MAD, which brings us to the issue of brinksmanship, that the United States needed to be willing to go right to the brink of nuclear war. It's like a game of chicken to see who's going to blink first. He believed that we needed to supply economic aid around the world to prevent countries from becoming economically disadvantaged and potentially turning towards communism as an answer to that problem. He authorized a lot of economic aid, and he also authorized covert operations, spies, staging of coups, all in the name, again, of containment. The Eisenhower Doctrine is simply the Truman Doctrine of containment extended to the Middle East. But he did leave his sort of farewell address, had to do with concerns about the growing military-industrial complex, that defense spending was getting out of control, and we needed to be careful as a nation how much power and authority we ceded to our military, which is such an interesting commentary today, especially coming from a general. This is a little video about the U-2 spy plane incident that Eisenhower has to deal with, and it really sets the stage for how he will deal with future incidents.
In the late 1950s, it seemed as if the Cold War was beginning to thaw. President Dwight Eisenhower and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had a good relationship, and the two nations seemed to be cooperating. Unfortunately, the peace would not last. In 1960, an American U-2 plane was shot down over Soviet airspace. So what kind of plane was the U-2? What did the United States use it for? In the mid-1950s, the U.S. government saw the need for a new type of aircraft, a spy plane capable of flying high above the Soviet Union for the purposes of photographing bases and installations in order to monitor Soviet military strength. Lockheed, one of the United States' top manufacturers of aircraft, was contracted to build the planes. The end result of their efforts was the Utility Plane II, or the U-2 for short. The plane was capable of flying at altitudes up to 14 miles high and could stay in the air up to 11 hours. High-powered cameras on the aircraft could photograph a golf ball placed on a putting green 14 miles below. The pilots who flew the U-2 were required to wear a pressurized suit during flights because of the altitude, and could not drink any liquids for several hours prior to each flight. The flights usually lasted in between 7 to 8 hours. The U-2 made its first flight in 1957 and worked precisely as it was built to. As a result of the flights, the United States discovered that the Soviet military was not nearly as large or powerful as they were making the rest of the world believe. But, in April of 1960, a U-2 piloted by Gary Powers was making a routine flight over the Soviet Union when the plane was struck by a Soviet missile. Powers parachuted safely to the ground, but was captured by the Soviet military. The incident provided proof of what the Soviets had been claiming for some time. The United States had been spying on the USSR. With this discovery, the American-Soviet relationship was shattered. Because of the U-2 incident, the Cold War divide deepened even further, and it would be another 25 years before the tensions softened again and any real progress would be made between the two nations.
There is a cool movie about that incident that, I don't know, that might be the movie that we watch after the exam. It's called Bridge of Spies. It's pretty cool. This is 2008 and U.S. military spending versus the world in 2008. So you can see that, Eisenhower's sort of prediction about our military spending is accurate. So a couple of crises for the rest of this discussion, other than the U-2 spy plane incident that Eisenhower has to deal with. So the first is the Suez Canal crisis. The Suez Canal is this incredibly important transportation route in Egypt, in the Middle East. And actually, right now, there's something really fascinating going on with the Suez Canal. There is a cargo ship that is stuck there, and it's blocking passage to the Suez Canal. They're saying it's going to have to be scuttled. Like, it's this very dramatic situation, but it's going to have a massive impact on world trade, global trade, because this is such an important waterway. Anyway, I digress. The Suez Canal crisis of Eisenhower era has to do with Egypt nationalizing the canal, which just means that it had been controlled by international forces, and Egypt is angry with Israel, and also the French and British response to Israel, which seems to be too pro-Israel for Egypt's taste. And so Egypt, in response, nationalizes the canal, which means it assumes control of the canal and denies access to Britain and France, and also makes overtures to the USSR. So the question at the heart of this is whether or not the United Nations is going to allow the Soviet Union to control the Suez Canal through the Egyptians. The United States has some frustrations with how Britain and France handle this whole situation. Britain and France will attack Egypt in an effort to take back the Suez Canal. They're unsuccessful. They're forced to withdraw. The United States and the UN will intervene and eventually negotiate usage terms, but it is a very, very, very tense and uncomfortable situation. In Guatemala, we have a dictator coming to power with a promise of reducing poverty in Guatemala. This is where Guatemala is. But he also wants to redistribute land. Now, is this communist? And also, what about the American landowners, in particular, the American Fruit Company that own, massive amounts of acreage in Guatemala? Will that land be taken and redistributed? So the United States decides, we can't allow a leftist dictator to mess with our economic interests in Guatemala. So the CIA will train mercenaries in order to topple the government. The army refuses to defend their president, and then the army's leader will become a new and very brutal dictator. The Guatemalan people do not like him at all. However, he is loyal to U.S. economic interests, and at this point in the Cold War, that is what we care about. So a little bit of a timeline of the U.S.-sponsored coup. Starts all the way back in 1944. 10 years later, we have a CIA-orchestrated coup to overthrow the Guatemalan government and the resignation of the leader. Uprisings in Hungary. The Hungarians will attempt to separate from the USSR. Their protest movement, the name of their movement is known as Solidarity. The United States and the UN look the other way as the USSR sends Soviet troops into Hungary because they have concerns that this will spark a larger conflict. Ultimately, more than 20,000 Hungarians are killed, and the Hungarian leader is executed for treason. In Taiwan, Eisenhower will continue to see Taiwan as part of an anti-communist barrier in Asia and wants to continue this idea of the Truman Doctrine containing communism and keeping it out of Taiwan. China will attempt to move some naval vessels into the Strait of Taiwan, into the waters around Taiwan, and claim it as part of the mainland. The United States Navy will defend Taiwan and even threatens nuclear action. There are still war games in this region. So it's an area, it's one of those flashpoints where tensions often run high. In Iran, we're going to talk about another sort of transfer of power in the 70s. But in the 50s, we have Iran, a popular prime minister coming to power in 1951, but he nationalizes the oil fields and seems poised to strike a deal with the Soviets. The British will respond with an embargo. The United States will help to overthrow that popular leader and instead install an incredibly unpopular leader known as the Shah. And it will be the Shah that is overthrown in the 70s, ultimately leading to the Iranian hostage crisis under Jimmy Carter. Okay, so I know that was very quick. I just wanted to mention a few high points of Eisenhower and his Cold War efforts.